Senator Sampson, good morning.
Good morning, Madam President. I am very pleased to be back in the chamber today, relieved actually that we are doing the people's business in what I perceive to be the more or less correct way, with the legislature involved in producing the policy that guides our state. It does make me think that we ought to be addressing a lot of other actions taken by the governor over the last several months. I believe we should be reviewing all of the executive orders, not just this one, and particularly those that have been called into question. He's already had one of those executive orders reversed, and I believe there could potentially be more, and we could easily address that in this chamber. This bill, thankfully, could legitimately fall into the category of being considered necessary for the legislature to meet because of our emergency situation. But I would say that one, possibly two out of the four bills actually qualifying based on those guidelines is not really a good average. So what really is the criteria that allows a bill to be brought to this chamber and makes it worthy of a vote under these emergency certification situation parameters? So it can't really be related to the COVID-19 crisis. After all, we have a bill about police accountability, which has very little to do with the COVID-19 crisis. And there's another bill on today's agenda regarding insulin that the majority of it doesn't even take effect until March of 22, long after another legislature is elected. So those things concern me, as well as the fact that we are not addressing the many more genuinely important items, the financial solvency of our state, and the livelihood of millions of Connecticut residents. But I know I need to stay on the bill. I just wanted to make the point that it really does make me wonder if it's dangerous for us to be here or not. Is it dangerous for citizens to venture out of their homes to go to the store or to work or to vote? I'm not a doctor, and I don't claim to be. But I guess I want to make the point that we should strive for consistency as the representatives of our constituents and as a state government when we are advising people on what they should be doing. Sadly, sometimes politics enters into the policymaking process, and that is likely to negatively impact the work product. And I think that includes the bill before us. I do want to say right from the outset that I have been very vocally in support of allowing COVID-19 to be an acceptable excuse to vote by absentee. And I believe my Republican colleagues are with me on this. And in fact, we saw in the House that this bill did pass overwhelmingly. And I do intend to vote for this bill today, although becoming intimately familiar with each part of it over the last several days has piqued my frustration level just a little bit. I said yesterday in a Facebook post when I was asked about this that I thought this bill was 51-49 and just barely earns my support. One concern is the fact that I have been essentially blocked from my ability to amend this bill by the actions of the House Minority Leader's inclination to adjourn the House sine die. For those that don't know the process, every bill that is presented has to pass both chambers in the same form. And by adjourning the House, essentially that means that anything that is passed in the Senate has no place to go. My understanding is that the House would actually have to start over with the same legislation again. So that concerns me because there are changes I would like to see made to this bill. I suspect that was done more for the police accountability bill to lock that into place, but it does have an effect on all of the legislation before us today. And I would encourage the leaders to contemplate a rule going forward to prohibit that from happening again. And in fact, that's the reason why we normally adjourn sine die in joint session. I'm going to offer my amendments today either way. because I believe that they should be on the record, and I believe we should vote on them, even if it means that we elongate this process. We want to get things right. So now I've also had to make the choice to vote up or down on the bill as it is, since I'm aware that those amendments are not going to be passed in light of that reason. And speaking of which, the public should realize that this bill is not just about allowing people to vote based on having COVID-19 as a concern and being able to obtain an absentee ballot. It is really chock full of unrelated and even contrary items. How can this happen, Rob? Well, it happens because there are those that don't respect the legislative process enough to have included the minority in the bill-making process in this case. It would mean that every legislature would be notified about what's happening with this bill. That means both parties. That means that the public would be informed of hearings. They would get proper notice as required by our rules. Instead, in this case, there was no public hearing. There was something called a listening session, which I appreciate the fact that it had a different name to indicate that it was, in fact, not a proper public hearing. And I am the ranking Republican senator on the Government Administration and Elections Committee. And I was not consulted, not even one time, by email, by phone call, in the entire discussion process on what this bill might contain. Not even one time. I found out about the listening session just about 24 hours before it happened. That is all. So a good place to start on this bill, I guess, is about whether it's truly needed or not. Section 1 is the crux of the bill. It's what expands the reasons for obtaining an absentee ballot, and it essentially includes the sickness of COVID-19 respiratory disease. But I do have some questions about that section, if I could ask them to the proponent of the bill through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell, prepare yourself. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. And good to see my colleague over there. I guess the first question I would ask is, if the Senate rejects this legislation, may an individual that has a positive diagnosis of COVID-19 still apply for and vote via absentee ballot? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Haskell.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's an honor to be here back in the chamber, and I want to thank my colleague, Senator Flexier, for all of her work on this bill. Thank you, Senator Sampson, for the question. An individual who has been diagnosed with COVID-19 would certainly qualify under the existing statute for absentee ballots because that individual has a illness or a sickness that they can check the box. What this legislation addresses is the folks who have not been diagnosed with COVID-19, but perhaps they are immunocompromised, perhaps they are elderly, perhaps, Madam President, they've just been watching the news, and they are fearful about venturing into a crowded polling location. This bill addresses those individuals who do not have a diagnosis but are fearful of becoming ill. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Haskell. Senator Sampson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer. Although I want to ask a more direct question about the second part of your statement, which is that if the Senate rejects this legislation, would an individual that does not have a positive diagnosis of COVID-19, but who is under a mandatory quarantine during the election period due to a potential exposure of COVID-19, would they be able to apply for and vote via absentee ballot? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator, for the question. With regard to an individual who does not have a positive diagnosis, my understanding is that that person would not currently qualify for an absentee ballot, and it is exactly that person who we have in mind in passing this legislation to make sure that everyone can continue to heed public health guidance, to isolate if it is deemed necessary by a public health professional, to social distance, to follow the guidance and the science of the CDC, while still being able to exercise their right to vote.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate the answer. And I suppose that is why we are here today, is to really flesh out and make sure that we resolve that question. Because my understanding is that even if you are not COVID-19 positive, but you are under a mandatory quarantine because of the potential risk of COVID-19, you would still be able to apply for and vote absentee. So I'm interested that we don't necessarily see that the same way. But I guess, as I said, that's why this bill is before us, is to resolve that issue. It looks like my colleague wants to say something about that, and I'd like to allow him to. Through you, Madam President.
Absolutely. Senator Haskell.
Thank you to the ranking member, Madam President. I just want to specify that the state statutes say his or her illness. So an individual who has not been diagnosed but is following the advice of their doctor, and perhaps that means a 14-day quarantine, perhaps it means social distancing whenever possible, unless that person, that his or her voter has an illness, then my understanding is under our current state statutes, that person would not qualify for an absentee ballot. That is what this bill seeks to address.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill is intended to essentially protect people from the potential of coming down with the virus, of course. But we have other legislation that is pending. We have the governor issuing executive orders on various business openings. There's a lot of discussion now about schools, in fact. I'm just curious, through you, Madam President, if we open schools, are children able to gather in confined areas to attend class versus maybe people being able to gather at the polling place and exercise their right to vote? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by saying the bill does not contemplate school reopening or procedures or classroom density. But I will say that consistent through every state plan that the governor's office has put out, that our State Department of Education has been coordinating with local boards of education, I've looked carefully for this. There is a provision that says any parent can make a decision for his or her family to educate their child from home, to avail themselves of remote learning opportunities because they're fearful of going into that crowded location, of having a child return to the classroom. What this bill seeks to address is making sure that that very same flexibility is granted to voters. There is a right to vote just as there is a right to be educated in our public school system, and making sure that those who don't feel comfortable voting in person have an opportunity to do so from the safety of their own home is the reason we're debating this bill today. Now, I will say, Madam President, that anyone who would prefer to vote in person will still have the opportunity to do so should this legislation pass. This is merely about flexibility.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate the very lengthy answer. I guess what I'm driving at here really is that the state government has issued a number of policies that address what is safe and what is not safe for people to do on a daily basis, whether they're going to go to the grocery store or to any other business, or they're going to go out to eat or shopping. We have established policies as a state government through the governor's executive action. And essentially, it looks like many of those things have deemed to be safe, deemed to have been, or have been deemed to be safe, I guess is what I'm trying to say, by virtue of the executive orders allowing businesses to open, allowing restaurants to open with certain rules and parameters. And I'm just curious whether or not those rules and parameters apply in the case of voting, or that is something different. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the ranking member for his question. Those businesses that have been deemed safe to open have been deemed safe for some, but not all, Madam President. I'm sure, and I'm not sure that this is germane to the bill, but I am sure that the good senator has received many, many calls and emails and text messages from constituents who are immunocompromised, who fall into those high-risk categories, who are fearful about going out to the grocery store. That's why the 7 towns that I represent have each launched remarkable campaigns to make sure that groceries are delivered for seniors for whom it is not safe to go to the grocery store. I worry that we're veering away from the bill at hand, but I will say that as the state seeks to reopen businesses to make opportunities available to citizens, it contemplates what might be safe for some as they make an individual decision, and that's what this bill is about, making sure that every individual voter has the opportunity to cast their vote in a manner that is safe and convenient for them. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you again for the answer. And I also fear that we are veering away from the bill, and I'm trying to ask very quick questions so that we can create a train of thought about what is safe and what is not safe and why this bill is before us, as you mentioned. The state policies seem to indicate that it is safe for at least some people to gather as long as they are wearing a mask and they remain socially distanced. Is that an accurate statement through you, Madam President?
Senator Haskell.
Yes, Madam President. Again, I don't think that this matter is addressed in the bill, but certainly the State Department of Public Health has advised individuals who are out in public to wear a mask, has advised individuals to maintain 6 feet of social distancing, and for those who are in high-risk categories, it has advised them to stay home and self-isolate. I will say, Madam President, that it is not contemplated in this bill, but the Secretary of State's office has repeatedly and publicly emphasized that they will be providing PPE, that's personal protective equipment, at every polling location across the state of Connecticut, and there are safe practices that, guided by science, that are going to be implemented by town clerks and town registrars, and frankly, the heroes who are going to sign up to work at our polling locations this year.
Thank you, Senator Haskell. Senator Sampson.
And thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer. So I gathered that the determination is that at least for some people, following the guidelines is meant to keep them safe. Based on that, my question really extends to why does this bill contemplate allowing any person to vote via absentee ballot because of COVID-19 if it is perfectly safe for them to follow the same parameters that they might going to a store shopping? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. I think what the question fails to wrestle with is the fact that just because something is safe for all, for some, does not mean that it is safe for all. It will be safe. It may be safe for some individuals to go to a polling location and vote in person. Frankly, Madam President, I may decide to vote in person. I haven't decided yet. It will depend on the public health indicators and probably a variety of other factors. But every individual will have that opportunity to vote in person should they so choose. What this bill addresses is making sure that those folks who are immunocompromised, for whom it is not safe to go into a crowded grocery store, for whom it is not safe to return to a crowded classroom, that they too have an opportunity to participate in the democratic process, that they are not disenfranchised because of this pandemic. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, I appreciate that answer, but it seems like we're treading over the same territory over and over again. And I really just want to focus on whether or not masks and social distancing works. And if that's true, when you go to the grocery store, is it true at the polling place? It's really this simple question. I'm not trying to catch my colleague in a trap. I'm simply trying to flesh out why the bill is written as it is to affect every voter in the entire state. Not just those ones that are potentially immunocompromised. It allows every person to vote absentee. And I'm just curious why the bill was written in such a broad manner when it seems to me that the policies of this state would indicate that many people, in fact, most people, I heard the governor say the other day that the majority of businesses are open in this state, are unaffected. And as long as they follow the procedures, masks and social distancing, that they would not be unaffected and they could vote in person. And at issue here is really whether or not this is necessary for every potential voter. And that's what I'm driving at. And I'd like to hear the proponents' reason for why the bill is broadly written in those terms. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm happy to answer the ranking member's question to the best of my ability. I'm not a doctor, but over the course of this pandemic, I've learned a lot about epidemiology. I think we all have. And I think one thing we've discovered is that everyone's health situation is unique. It is very difficult to determine exactly what is safe and what is not safe for an individual. The governor's executive orders have tried to do that and making sure that mask compliance is up. But ultimately, this mitigating the spread of COVID-19, containing this pandemic, it comes down to the individual decisions, the deeply personal health decisions that every one of our constituents make every day. And on November 3rd and on August 11th, they're going to make a decision about their own public health that should not jeopardize their ability to participate in this election. Everyone in my belief, Madam President, specifically answering the ranking member's question concerning why not build a bill that just relates to those who are immunocompromised, is the fact that we know gatherings of those who are asymptomatic but have COVID-19 play a deadly role in spreading this virus. Look at, unfortunately, tragically, there are young people who get together in this thinking that they are immune or that they are somehow not subject to the deadly implications of this virus. Perhaps they might not die of COVID-19. They may not be on a respirator. They may not go into the ICU of our local hospital, but they bring it home with them. They bring it to their loved ones. They risk infecting their grandparents, their parents, their teachers, their aunts, their uncles, their loved ones, their neighbors, their family members. And that is a risk that we cannot accept, Madam President. That is why in this bill it just provides an opportunity for anybody who wants to vote from the safety of their living room to do so. It is not a requirement, and we are not passing this bill to have long-term implications in the state of Connecticut. The section concerning absentee ballot applications applies narrowly to the August 11th primary and to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Beyond that, I look forward to debating whether or not we should make absentee ballots more available with the ranking member. I'd be happy to debate in another forum whether or not masks work and we should obey the science of the CDC, but that's not what is at hand here, with all due respect to the ranking member. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I don't have any further questions on that part of it. I will come back to it. I'll just point out that dialogue is very indicative of the mixed signals that we are getting from the governor and our state government as a whole. In some cases, they say that it's safe for people to go out and venture to a restaurant as long as they are practicing social distancing. They can even take off their masks when they're at their table. But in other cases, they're suggesting that somehow there is a risk present. So it leads one to believe. I mean, are they confident that masks and social distancing prevents the spread of the disease? If they are, then it makes one wonder why we would have to go through any other protocol for voting that might be different for other things. Now, again, I have said from the outset that I support this. I understand that people are fearful of COVID-19, justifiably or not. There is mixed science out there about how deadly the disease is and how able it is to be spread and what people are able to transmit it, whether asymptomatic people are able to transmit it or whether children are carriers of the disease even if they don't show symptoms, etc. All of that is up for debate, and I understand that completely. And I don't envy the governor and his staff trying to come up with decisions on these things. What I'm suggesting is that consistency is key. The people that we represent deserve consistent answers, and if we are telling them that it's safe to go to the store with a mask and social distancing, and then at the same time telling them we're going to send you an absentee ballot anyway, it makes one wonder what the truth really is. And that's all I was trying to get at. Just moving forward, line 24 of the bill says, no person shall misrepresent the eligibility requirements for voting by absentee ballot prescribed in subsection A to any elector or prospective absentee ballot. I'm curious because this seems to affect the Secretary of State directly, and I'm wondering if the reason why this is before us is because of the statement that the Secretary of State made on the absentee ballot application also, which is printed in bold print. It says, all voters are able to check this box pursuant to Executive Order 7QQ. Now, I know there's some legal action on that too, but I'm curious, through you, Madam President, whether or not this section is intended to prevent the Secretary of State from overstepping her bounds in the future.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe the ranking member is referring to line 24, section B. That is a matter of existing law and is not impacted by this bill whatsoever.
Senator Sampson.
I appreciate that very much. And I'm wondering if, understanding that it's existing law, whether or not we believe that there is any concern generated by the Secretary of State's actions in the way she worded the ballot having to do with this, or whether the gentleman believes that her statement is completely accurate. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. At the time that absentee ballot applications were issued to every registered Democrat and every registered Republican in time for the August 11th primary, the governor had signed Executive Order 7QQ, which actually does exactly what this state statute seeks to do, making sure that due to the the sickness of COVID-19, every registered voter is eligible for an absentee ballot. So I have no reason to believe that the Secretary of State was out of bounds in making that box available on the form. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I will just raise this as another inconsistency, since we just had a conversation essentially saying that people that do not have symptoms of COVID-19 are not eligible to vote. This is what I just learned. And as a result, I don't believe that, and that's a constitutional matter, I don't know that a statement that's saying that all voters are able to check the box is a truthful statement until this law is passed. And I would just point that out, that it's another case where consistency matters, and we need to be telling the citizens of our state accurate information, and we must stick by it each day. Section 2 and 3 have to do with the way the envelopes are printed, the authority of the Secretary of State on how she's got to put the language on them. I'll point out that in Section 3 of the bill, it says the Secretary of State may make any changes in any forms. And I just want to ask, through you, Madam President, whether that allows the Secretary of State to go beyond the constitutional requirements that she has when producing the absentee ballot application and the absentee ballot itself. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would refer the ranking member to Title IX, Section 3, which designates the Secretary of State, who is duly elected, not some appointed person behind a desk, but elected by everyone who shows up on Election Day, or perhaps in this case, votes from the safety of their own home, is the chief elections official, presumed to be correct in her interpretation of Title IX. Section 3 allows changes to forms so that they conform to provisions of law for the state election in 2020. In other words, it essentially ensures that the Secretary of State has the ability, Madam President, to implement the changes that we are debating here today and may pass later this afternoon. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate the answer. I would just point out that while the Secretary of State is a duly elected official of the state of Connecticut, they are also a partisan politician that runs as a member of a political party, and they are not above campaigning or putting forward political rhetoric and policy. And when we give them power in our laws to make any changes in any forms, that should raise a concern. Section 4, just moving forward, allows the absentee ballots to be mailed to applicants by a municipal clerk or to be mailed by a third-party mailing vendor that is approved by that Secretary of State. And I just have a couple of questions about that. First off, through you, Madam President, what is contemplated here by a third-party mailing vendor? Are we talking about the Postal Service, or are we talking about UPS, or is it something different? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Madam President, I would defer to individual town clerks and the Secretary of State in determining the process for making sure that ballots that are requested end up in the hands of voters. The reason for this section is to grant town clerks with greater flexibility. Should this bill pass, we are very likely to see an increase in absentee ballot requests. We have already seen that, given Executive Order 7QQ is in effect, and many constituents, Democrats and Republicans, are requesting absentee ballots for the upcoming August 11th primary. We know that we're asking town clerks to work hard, and we're granting them a little bit more flexibility in how the ballots will actually be distributed once the request is received. I hope that answers the good senator's question. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Haskell. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that answer, but maybe the gentleman can let me know what the process is and how we select and how we approve that third-party vendor. Who handles that process, and how is it completed? Who essentially makes the approval, and based on what criteria? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. That would be the Secretary of State's office pursuant to their rights and responsibilities under Title IX of our state statutes. And more specifically, with regard, I realize I overlooked a portion of the ranking member's question. It would be a mail house, for example, would be the third-party vendor in this situation. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. So I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, that This is not done like a lot of other state contracts where there is a competitive bidding process and vendors come forward and they are selected, by a process that makes sure that it's above board. In this case, you're suggesting that the Secretary of State, who I just mentioned, is a political person by nature of the way we elect the Secretary of State. She's going to make the choice. And there is no other criteria other than she has the authority under Title IX. Is that what I'm hearing through you, Madam President?
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. Since mail houses are used for a variety of purposes in government, for example, IRS mail-ins, among other government functions, this is not a new process by which the Secretary of State would seek out a mail vendor. And in fact, my understanding is that for the August 11th primary, the Secretary's office opted to use an existing state contractor, somebody who had prior experience in dealing with sensitive government documents and who had actually done election-related mail-in the state of Rhode Island. So because it was an existing state contractor, there was to my knowledge, a trust and an understanding between the Secretary of State's office and this third-party vendor. Again, I do want to emphasize that all this bill does is allow town clerks to make use of a third-party vendor. It is not required under the legislation. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, that's interesting. And I will point out that there was testimony at the listening session by the Connecticut Town Clerks Association president. Her name is Anna Posniak, and she wrote a rather lengthy bit of testimony, but I captured just some of her comments. And she points out that the mailing that has already occurred for the absentee ballot applications for the primary election in August has a number of problems. There is missing information from the inner envelope. There is no serial number on the inner envelope. Only the voter ID and barcode is present, which is needed for processing the return. The only address on the inner envelope is the mailing address, which means that if you mailed the absentee ballot to an address within your city or town, it probably is going to be that person's residential address. But what if it is an address that's out of state, something like that? There's a good chance that we would not be sending it to the person's correct residential address. The only instructions that the voter will receive are printed on the inner envelope, and the instructions refer to the outer serial number, which doesn't exist. There is no box for the designee to sign when delivering the ballot in person to the town clerk's office also. So these are just a few items that are listed by the Connecticut Town Clerks Association as concerns. And I just wanted to bring them forward that we've already experienced problems with this process. And elections are something that are important enough for us to focus on maintaining the highest level of integrity. And I just have some concerns about interjecting a new process and giving a political elected person the opportunity to make many of these decisions on their own with very little oversight. Just moving on to Section 5. Section 5 is the section that has to do with the ballot boxes. I'm sure that folks watching this know what I'm referring to, which is these new boxes that are shaped like U.S. Postal Service mailboxes that we typically see that are navy blue, but these are gold and silver, and they are intended for dropping off absentee ballots. So we've already had a number of news stories surrounding these ballot boxes, and there is some concern about it. First off, they're produced at great expense. Of course, this money came from the CARES Act funding that came from the federal government, but I would remind everyone listening that we're all paying taxes that were used for these boxes. And my personal opinion is that they are completely unnecessary. When you are voting by absentee, it's traditionally done through the mail or dropped off at the town clerk's office. There's no reason why that should change. And I would also suggest that many, many towns have come up with their own system, which is following protocols similar to what we have been guided by our governor and the state government as what is a safe protocol, including safe distancing and masks and so forth. So I understand that we want people to go out and vote, but we want to minimize the risk of COVID, which is why we're here talking about this bill. But I am confused about how these boxes actually minimize that risk. Can't people just put their absentee ballot in the mail? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank the ranking member for his question. Individuals can absolutely put their absentee ballot application in the mail. The reason that the Secretary of State has decided to use the $5.4 million in federal funding that has come to Connecticut through the CARES Act for the purpose of securing elections to buy and install absentee ballot boxes is the very reason that the good senator pointed out. Many individuals prefer not to put it in the mail. They want to make sure that their ballot is actually delivered. They might have questions about the U.S. Postal Service. They might fill out their ballot on the morning of Election Day and be very fearful that it won't reach the town clerk until days after the election. So, as the good senator pointed out, many individuals usually have the opportunity to go to town hall and deliver their ballot in person. The problem, Madam President, is that many town halls are closed, and those that aren't are still doing their very best to reduce the number of visitors for the safety of their staff and for the safety of their community. So the intention of the absentee ballot boxes is to make sure that individuals who do want to drop off their ballot in person, they don't want to pay for a stamp, whatever the reason is, they want to make sure that their ballot is actually delivered in person, that they don't have to venture inside of the town hall, and that they can do so very safely in a secure drop box outside. I hope that answers the good senator's question. Thank you.
Senator Sampson.
And thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator, for that answer. I think it's important that you mentioned right at the outset of your response that the purpose is security, and that is my concern also. I think more than anything, we should be concerned about security when it comes to these ballot boxes. Now, I've seen a couple of them close up, and I will tell you I've got a couple of concerns right off. Number one is that if you've seen one, they are covered in fingerprints. I mean, covered in fingerprints. There are some images on social media floating around where you can see that thousands of people have pushed the door open, which is required to actually insert something into the box. It looks like a COVID breeding ground, to be honest with you. And I'm just curious if anyone is charged with taking care of cleaning those. But the bigger issue is security itself, and that is, what guarantee can we have, through you, Madam President, I'll ask this question, what guarantee is there that someone will not tamper or put something in that very large door? Mail boxes have a very small slot to prevent tampering. They are only placed at post offices where they can be monitored. We're talking about ballots here, something much more important, and we've got this big door. So I'm just curious, can you guarantee that someone's not going to put something, a foreign substance, in one of those boxes? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to address both of the good senator's questions. First of all, I'm not a public health official. I feel as though my job as an elected official is to elevate the voices of public health officials, those who have repeatedly advised us that, yes, there are risks with contact outside, but the risks of contracting COVID-19, of coming into contact with those who are infected, is so much greater in indoor environments. Thus, the need to place these ballot boxes outdoors. They may not be perfect. I take the good senator's suggestion, and I hope the Secretary of State, who is charged under this legislation with implementing instructions for the use of those ballot boxes, actually does implement some cleaning. I think that that's a really great suggestion. With regard to the second question, of course, I and nobody else in the Senate circle can guarantee that ballots won't be tampered with. We can vehemently remind voters that under state statute, it is a 5-year jail sentence. It is a crime to tamper with the ballot. And that individual may face a 5-year jail sentence in addition to a $5,000 fine per ballot. In addition, Madam President, we should remember that there are federal candidates on the ballot this year, and therefore tampering with the ballot may also be a civil rights violation charged in federal courts. So tampering with the ballot is not only discouraged, it is in fact illegal in the state of Connecticut. While we can never make guarantees, we do know that the very infrastructure that the Secretary of State has decided to use and install in these ballot boxes has worked elsewhere elsewhere in states across the country. One of the things I love about state politics is that we've got 49 other states to look to for good examples and bad examples. These boxes have been used for election purposes. We have not seen high rates of tampering with voters. Obviously, Madam President, I'm sure that the good senator knows this section does contemplate a security mechanism that 29 days before the election and each weekday thereafter, the municipal clerk will retrieve each ballot from the drop box. And Madam Clerk, importantly for security purposes, if the drop box is located outside a building other than where the clerk's office is located, the clerk or their designee must be escorted by a police officer for retrieval. So I hope that answers the good senator's questions. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, thank you for the very lengthy and generous answer. But I don't know if we actually touched the question, which was, how can we guarantee that someone will not tamper with one of those boxes? I appreciate all of the other comments. I respect your opinion about what our duty is as elected officials, but I feel my duty as a state senator is to represent my constituents first and foremost, not to elevate anyone else. My job is to represent my constituents, and my constituents are concerned about the security of elections and making sure that their votes are counted, which means they want to know that when they put their ballot in that box, that there is zero chance that it is going to be tampered with, and 100% chance that it is going to end up in the hands of the people that count the ballots, and it will go towards that election as they intended. And I don't know that we have that. I also would suggest that there are numerous mixed signals, again, about the health concerns about being outdoors and indoors. If you look at the governor's executive orders, you're going to find contradictions about what it's safe to do outdoors and indoors all over the place. Are you suggesting, through you, Madam President, Senator, that because these drop boxes are outdoors, that no one should be concerned about being contaminated by touching that box that has loads and loads of fingerprints on it? Are you promising us that there is no chance for contamination or getting COVID-19 from that box? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. The answer to the good senator's question is absolutely not. Just for the very same reason that when I step away from this microphone and this desk, I will put my mask back on. It will not eliminate the risk of COVID-19, but it will dramatically reduce it. I don't know that because I'm a state senator. I know that because I have listened to public health officials carefully over the course of this pandemic, nonpartisan voices who have said that, of course, we can never eliminate the risk of infection, but things like wearing masks and moving as many functions as possible to outdoors using hand sanitizer, washing your hands, all of those factors mitigate the risk, reduce the risk. They do not eliminate the risk. So neither I nor anyone in this circle can guarantee the good senator's question, but I do hope that that addresses the concern.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank the gentleman for his answer. And I appreciate that because we don't know. We have no idea whether COVID-19 can be transmitted that way. And I believe people, my constituents, deserve to know that there is the potential of contamination in that way. I don't think it's a significant concern either, but after viewing those boxes and seeing the images of the many, many fingerprints, it just shows that there is a large chance that bacteria and things are going to be left there that can be transmitted. And I've heard mixed news reports about how long the COVID-19 virus survives on its own in various places, and as I'm sure you have. So who really knows? I also appreciate the comments about the penalties for tampering with an election or the ballots, and I appreciate that also. But I'll note that just because we have laws does not mean that people do not violate them every day. In fact, a big issue that's going to happen later today is about whether or not we are going to diminish the ability for the enforcement of our laws. And I've got grave concerns over that. And this is a related situation. And there are other ones which we'll touch on before this debate is over about how the police are necessarily or unnecessarily involved in this election process. People are tearing down statues. People are defacing different things. This body has sanctioned cities, sanctuary cities in this state. All of these things are against the law, and yet they still happen. So there is no guarantee that we can stop someone from tampering with one of these boxes or throwing a foreign substance in it or even stealing the entire box itself, as has happened with post office post office boxes. So I guess the next question I have is, what is the procedure if a municipal clerk discovers that the drop box has been tampered with? What happens then? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. That would be a matter, my understanding, to be referred immediately to law enforcement for the full enforcement of our state statutes and perhaps federal statutes that might apply given the fact that federal candidates are on the ballot. There is nothing in this legislation that contemplates, that hints, that indicates, let alone sanctions, any lessening of the full enforcement of our election security statutes. That includes, I'm going to remind those who are watching at home one more time, a $5,000 penalty for every ballot in addition to a potential 5-year prison sentence. And that's just the state statute. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, elsewhere in this country, there are people that have taken over entire city blocks, taken over the police station in that city. I don't think that they're going to be concerned with destroying a ballot box if it becomes a politically charged election. I really don't. And I believe people have a genuine concern over whether our elections are going to end up affected by some of the tremendous strife that is occurring across our country. I'm concerned about it. I also have concerns about the election itself. It's not just a matter of whether we prosecute someone who tampers with a box. What happens to the election? If someone throws a cup of urine in this box and destroys all of the ballots, then what? What happens to that election? Are those ballots simply thrown out? Through you, Madam President?
Senator Haskell.
Madam President, I'm sure the good senator realizes that as we've discussed today, doing so would be a violation of state law and perhaps federal law. It would be at the discretion of the Secretary of State and the clerk to contact those folks who had voted, so long as their names could still be read, and to try to find a way to rectify the situation. I'm not sure that we faced this before in the state of Connecticut, so I don't have a good answer at the tip of my fingers.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, a crime doesn't even have to be committed. By the way, Senator, we could also have a situation where maybe the day after Election Day, the municipal clerk goes out to that box and opens it up and says, oh my God, there's a ton of ballots in here. What happens then? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Madam President, the bill does very specifically indicate who may and may not drop off a ballot in the drop box. It is the very same statute mirrored that already exists in terms of who can mail an absentee ballot on behalf of a voter. And in short, Madam President, it is only that voter, him or herself, or a designee of that voter, a spouse, someone of that nature. The Secretary of State in this legislation is charged with distributing and establishing instructions that will be placed outside of the absentee ballot box to make aware who is and is not eligible to drop off the ballot box. Look, illegal behavior happens in the state of Connecticut, and we, as in this body, are charged with making sure that we do everything we can to discourage that behavior, and if it does happen, to make sure that the full resources are brought to bear among those who seek to disrupt the security and the integrity of our elections. That involves not just the local police, Madam President. It would involve the FBI, the Secretary of State's office, and the State Elections Enforcement Commission. I hope that answers the good senator's question. But again, I want to repeat that, as the good senator noted earlier in this conversation, individuals very frequently drop off their ballot applications and their ballots into UPS boxes. All of these very same concerns exist in UPS boxes because, as the senator pointed out, they look very similar and operate in a very similar way to the absentee ballot secure drop boxes. We have not seen this become an issue, and I would strongly discourage the suggestion that voters plan to tamper with the election or plan to disrupt the election. In fact, the situation that I've seen in my community, Madam President, just for the August 11th primary, if you look at the number of folks who have requested absentee ballots, people are thrilled about the opportunity to vote from home. They're looking forward to participating. They want to make sure that every vote counts, whether their vote is for a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter. Surely everyone who walks into this building thinks that our democracy is stronger when more people participate, not fewer. I hope that answers the good senator's question.
Thank you, Senator Haskell. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate the response, but I didn't hear an answer to what happens to the election. We only heard an answer about the criminal act once again. And I'm not talking about a criminal act. I'm talking about a municipal clerk discovering that ballots were placed in the box after they were supposed to, or maybe the failure of the clerk itself, him or herself, from collecting the ballots at the proper time and discovering them the next day. I'm just saying that this is up in the air, that there are concerns that are going to be generated by these boxes now being an added element into our elections. And I think they're legitimate concerns, not the least of which is the mandate on municipalities. So it looks to me like the bill requires that every municipality must have one of these drop boxes, and they must use it in accordance with the Secretary of State's guidelines. Is that accurate through you, Madam President?
Senator Haskell.
That's correct, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
So, through you, Madam President, if a municipality has a more secure alternative, like maybe putting the box inside of a locked location where it's not going to be tampered with overnight, or there is a police presence involved, can they do that instead, or are they required to follow the Secretary of State's instructions? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator, for your question. The very purpose of the absentee ballot drop box is that it is placed outside so that voters can access it without having to venture inside and risk exposing themselves to COVID-19 and risk exposing the staff at our town halls across the state of Connecticut to the virus. So the point of the box is that it is placed outside, and I believe that that is what the Secretary of State's instructions will be, although those instructions have not actually been issued given the fact that this legislation has not yet passed. Thanks, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. So it appears that this is a point which we're simply going to disagree with. As I said, I'm going to end up supporting this bill anyway, but I would point out that this is something that has been brought to my attention by a great number of my constituents who have shared lots of very viable possibilities that might happen to these ballot boxes prior to Election Day. And we know that there are some municipal officials, mayors, who have decided that they are not comfortable with the Secretary of State's requirements because they're essentially charged with making sure that these ballot boxes are safe. And I don't know that they feel comfortable knowing that they can actually keep them that way. I mean, look, the city of Waterbury, someone took off the head of Columbus recently. It's right in front of Town Hall. What's to stop someone from damaging one of these boxes, tampering with it, etc.? That is the question that I have. I think it's a legitimate question in our very, very charged and heated world that we live in that I'm saddened by, but is a reality. And I think we should be taking that into consideration. And as a result, Madam President, I'm going to offer an amendment. The clerk has an amendment that he's holding on to, and the LCO for that is 3839. Would I be allowed to call it and be allowed to summarize the amendment through you, Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Senate amendment on the House Bill number 6002, LCL number 3838. Correct? Or 39, I'm sorry. Senator 39?
That's right.
3839.
Sorry.
Senator Sampson, please summarize.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a very simple amendment. It leaves the majority of the bill intact. There is nothing affecting the purpose of this bill, which is to allow people who are fearful of COVID-19 or infected from being able to vote via absentee ballot application. This simply eliminates the provision that allows the Secretary of State to use these large post office box looking ballot boxes. It eliminates that section and leaves the rest of the bill entirely. I move adoption, and I'd ask that the vote be taken by roll.
Thank you. The vote will be taken by roll, and Senator Haskell.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would encourage my colleagues to vote no on the amendment for the very reasons that we discussed earlier. I believe it is important, and I know that the Senate chairwoman does as well, that voters have an opportunity to drop off their ballot in a secure location that does not involve them going inside town halls, many of which I'll remind my colleagues are still closed to the public. Thank you, Madam President. I encourage my colleagues to vote no.
Thank you so much. Will you remark further on the amendment, Senator Whitkos?
Thank you, Madam President. Nice to see you today. I stand in support of the amendment that's before us, and I had the opportunity to visit a town hall recently, and there was a sign affixed to the official state of Connecticut ballot box which said, "Drop tax payments here." I mean, actually, it was located several different locations on the ballot box. So talk about confusion to somebody who is maybe going to the town hall to drop off a ballot box and say, well, is this supposed to be for a ballot or is this for a tax payment? Maybe it's because no regulations have been sent out or directions from the Secretary of State's office yet, but I'm certainly hopeful that that gets corrected. But to me, I think this amendment speaks to situations like that where if a town feels that they have the ability to create a safer system, more controlled system for their residents, then they should be allowed to do that. So I stand in favor of the amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Whitkos. Will you remark further on the amendment that is before the chamber? Will you remark further? Then what we will do is we will open the machines, and Mr. Clerk, would you kindly make sure everyone knows there is a vote?
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on House Bill 6002, Amendment A, LCL number 3839. An immediate ordered in the Senate. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. House Bill 6002, Amendment A, LCL number 3839. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate.
the senators voted? Have all the senators voted? The machine will be locked. Mr. Clerk, would you kindly announce the tally?
Total number voting is 36. Total voting yea is 14. Total voting nay is 22.
And the amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm disappointed the amendment failed, but I'm not surprised. I just am very, very hopeful that my colleague is correct and that when this primary election and then later the November election rolls around, that there is not any vandalism or tampering with those boxes. I believe it's a genuine concern, and I would have liked to address it here, but I remain hopeful that everything runs as smoothly as we would like to. Just moving on with the bill, I'll go to Section 6, which is the next section, and this essentially changes the Election Day registration requirements and allows the registrars to apply to the Secretary of State for an additional EDR location. And I would just like to get something on the record for legislative intent. And that is that this section refers to registrars, plural, indicating that both registrars, one from each party, would have to concur about that additional location. And I would just like to confirm for the record and for legislative intent that for a new EDR location, both registrars must agree. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. That is my reading of the legislation.
Senator Sampson.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you very much for that answer. Moving on, also, the next part refers to allowing folks that are participating in Election Day registration who happen to be in line at 8 p.m. to vote. And I guess the first question I would have to ask through you, Madam President, is what exactly does this expansion of Election Day registration have to do with preventing the spread of COVID-19? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. As the good senator is aware, given the fact that in the time that I've served in this building, the Government Administration and Elections Committee has heard legislation concerning Election Day registration and issues that communities in Connecticut have faced. This is a bill that has been subject to public hearing testimony in both the 2019 and 2020 session and has been voted out by the committee. The reason for its inclusion here, Madam President, is we want to make sure that in the upcoming election, given the fact that we are seeing historic and frankly unprecedented turnout in the upcoming primary election, that our poll workers are prepared to meet the demands of the 2020 November 3rd election. Given the fact that we know in New Haven and in Mansfield, many members of the community show up to vote and have been turned away because they are in line to vote prior to 8 p.m., but they are not registered to vote when the clock, when 7:59 turns to 8 p.m. Their right to vote has been taken away. We want to make sure that they too have an opportunity to vote. And given the fact that we're expecting high voter turnout, this is something that we believe ought to be included in the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, I appreciate the answer, but I don't believe it addressed my question, which is how does this prevent the spread of COVID-19? We were told by the chairman of the committee and throughout this debate that the reason why this legislation is before us is because we want to allow people to vote absentee ballot, via absentee ballot, rather than creating lines, putting people in a situation where there is a density of individuals that might lead to the spread. And this seems completely contrary. I started my remarks talking about being consistent, about the laws that we write have to make sense to people. If we're telling them that it's dangerous to be in groups of people in high density, that's why we need to have absentee voting expanded, then why are we doing something in the same exact bill that does the exact opposite? because this is going to create lines. How is the expansion of EDR a solution to the suppression of COVID-19?
Thank you. Senator Haskell.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good senator's concern. I recognize that perhaps this section of the statute is not as directly related to the pandemic at hand, but I do want to take issue with the phrasing of his question that this section of the legislation would create lines. With all due respect to the good senator, these are lines that already exist. They exist every year in Mansfield. They exist every year in New Haven. I want to thank Senator Flexer, Representative Haddad, individuals who represent those students in this building in making sure that they too have a right to vote. Here's the issue at hand. As many voters at home will know, is so long as you are in line to vote at 8 p.m., you are allowed to cast your vote, unless you are participating in Election Day registration. If you show up at 7 p.m. and there is an hour-long line, and you are still waiting, and the clock turns to 8, but you are not yet registered to vote because you were planning to avail yourselves of our state's Election Day registration opportunities, then you are not granted the right to vote. Then you are turned away from the polls. This legislation isn't about creating longer lines. It's about making sure that those who do show up in line have an opportunity to cast their vote. Of course, Madam President, we would prefer that all those who plan to use Election Day registration register in advance. It's simple and easy on the Secretary of State's website. We would also prefer that folks who are concerned about contracting COVID-19, concerned about spreading this virus, vote from home should this bill become law. However, we want to be realistic, Madam President, and we know that some people, especially young people, I hate to say that as the youngest member of the General Assembly, but it is true in Connecticut, young people often show up planning to use Election Day registration. They arrive late in the day, and there are long lines that prevent them from doing so. I understand that the good senator and I may disagree on this portion of the legislation, but given the fact that it has come before the General Assembly on so many occasions, given the fact that our committee has heard testimony year after year, and given the fact that we are on the precipice of a truly historic election in terms of voter turnout, we believe, based on the indicators on the both Democrat and Republican side from the primary, we believe it's important to include this portion of the bill in the legislation today. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. To say that the Vice Chairman of the GAE Committee and I disagree on this section of the bill, I think, is an understatement. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that expanding Election Day registration and encompassing this provision that will allow the line to continue beyond 8 p.m. and essentially create a new line, because what happens with this is you stand in one line to register, and then you are allowed to proceed to the other line to vote. This is going to create far more people actually at the polls, and there are numerous problems with this. But the point is that if the reason for expanding the absentee ballot provisions is because we don't want people waiting in long lines, even though they are wearing masks, because of the danger of spreading the virus, why are we creating a provision that essentially creates lines and puts crowds of people in a confined area? It's exactly antithetical to the rest of the bill. The executive order, which has been mentioned, and this bill is largely intended to sanctify, says, whereas absentee voting offers a proven method of secure voting that reduces the risk of transmission of COVID-19 by allowing individuals to vote by mail and thereby reducing the density of in-person voting at polling places. So that's the beginning of the bill that we all agree with. I opened my remarks today saying I want people to be able to vote absentee for fear of COVID-19. But yet there is this section in the bill that creates lines and puts people at risk, in my opinion. And I would further state that it is true, as the Vice Chairman mentioned, that we debate this legislation in the GAE committee year after year. But it's worth noting it has never become law before. It's never managed to actually make it here for a vote because it doesn't have the support of that. So having those provisions in the same emergency certified bill that did not receive proper hearings or proper notice to the public or a proper debate through the committee process, it simply shows the willingness of the majority to put this in this bill for political purposes. And I just want that on the record, that it shouldn't be here. It's not part of this discussion, and it's contrary to the intent and spirit of the bill. It is a public health concern to have people standing in lines in confined spaces. This is the position of the governor of our state. It is the position that I heard reiterated by my colleague, and whether it's true or not, that should be the consistent position of this body. This section does the exact opposite. I have a lot of, I'll call them rhetorical questions that I will just ask on this subject. Is this something we should be encouraging or discouraging? Putting people in lines on election day after 8 p.m. So if we should discourage that practice, then why can't we wait to pass this particular provision and have a discussion about it then? Think about what the average age of a municipal poll worker might be, or volunteers that are helping out on election day. Many of them are senior citizens. Are these individuals, based on the common knowledge, more or less vulnerable of becoming infected with COVID-19 and potentially having a negative result? And what is the average age of an EDR applicant? A lot of them are college age, students, that kind of thing. The vice chairman was kind enough to mention, places around the state, and he referred to Mansfield on purpose, referring to a lot of college students. Do these individuals tend to abide by or ignore the governor's executive orders about social distancing and wearing masks and so forth? So why would we want to encourage mixing the population of very likely senior citizen aged poll workers and younger people that disregard the health concerns? So if the line is really, really long also at 8 p.m., and we've seen that in other places around the state in previous elections, how long is it going to take all those people to vote? I mean, what if it goes on past midnight? That begins to affect a lot of things, including the requirements for reporting. How long is it going to take them not only to register, but then to cast their vote? And are we going to really ask our municipal poll workers, who are paid some small sum, but they're going to be there all day from 6 in the morning, are we really going to require them to stay there long into the night to make sure that this happens? And don't take my word for it. I have an email that was shared with me from the Republican Registrar of Voters in Bridgeport. I don't think she's under any illusion that Republicans are going to have a tremendous sweep in Bridgeport. Her concern is about whether or not this election goes off as a election should in the United States of America and not a third world country, where the votes are cast and counted and everyone believes the result. This is her quote. In a time when the Secretary of State has already added COVID as a reason to vote absentee and sent out all the absentee apps to keep polling traffic lower, as well as allowing us to man our precincts with a minimum of 3 workers as efforts to socially distance both staff and voters, then why in the world would we want to expand EDR? In Bridgeport, as well as other large cities, we may well have hundreds of people in line at 8 p.m. If past history prevails and with social distancing, the line will extend past the 75-foot line into the streets of downtown. As I read the bill, it says, we, the registrar, should place a poll worker or police officer, there's police officers being involved in our election process again, at the end of the line at 8 p.m. Putting a poll worker in that position in today's climate is very scary. And the police department is not always willing to provide us with the additional officers, and those we have are generally at the absentee ballot central counting area. And as the line stretches the streets, I foresee issues of people cutting or being let into the line along the way, thus increasing volume. That's from a registrar of voters who's been there, who's witnessed this situation, and she sees what's going to happen as a result of these changes. I have another question through you, Madam President, for my dear colleague, and that is, if an individual appears at an EDR location to register to vote, is there any sort of cross-check to make sure that they have not voted somewhere else? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Haskell.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This bill does not address or make any reforms to the cross-check procedure. Thank you.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I was just hoping you might confirm that there is a cross-check procedure in the current law, but unless there's a dispute over that, I will just state that there in fact is. We are required to double-check to make sure that people have not voted elsewhere, and they typically will call the other town where their previous address was. So the question I have is, how successful is this cross-check if the polling stations of a few major cities are the only ones that are still open because they have lines after 8 o'clock? So if I decide I'm going to go register and vote in Bridgeport, saying I moved from Wolcott, and Wolcott closes down at 8 p.m. and there's nobody there, what's going to happen? How does that cross-check work in a case like that? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Madam President, we've heard that the cross-check is messy, that there are need for improvements, and I would welcome the opportunity, should we both be reelected to this chamber, to work with the good senator and the GAE committee on making revisions to the cross-check. But because it's not contemplated in this bill, I'm not sure it's appropriate to address those specific concerns. Let me just say, though, with regard to the question as a whole, democracy is not always convenient. Sometimes it's a little bit messy, and yes, we ask a lot of our poll workers. In fact, I was very pleased the Secretary of State, Denise Merrill, has asked the Bar Association here in Connecticut to grant continuing ed requirements for lawyers so that they can satisfy those requirements and work as poll workers, because we do know, the good senator is exactly right. We know that poll workers are very often elderly individuals who are most at risk of COVID-19. So yes, we're in agreement about many of these concerns. What we're doing here today, Madam President, I believe is not only fighting for the votes of those who are elderly, those who would prefer to vote from home, those who are immunocompromised. We're also fighting for the votes of young people, because we know, and Senator Flexer and Representative Haddad can speak far more eloquently about this than I can, but we know that there is an unbelievable and unmistakable disappointment that young people, often first-time voters, feel when they follow the rules. They show up at the polling place at 7 o'clock before polls are closed, and yet by the time they reach the table, they're turned away. That's a voter that we may have discouraged from participating in the next election, and that is what's contemplated in this bill. With regard to cross-check, I would welcome the opportunity to continue working with the good senator to make that process better, to make it neater, to make it more efficient, but that is not addressed in this legislation before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, the question was, how successful is the cross-check, given that polling stations in the major cities may be open past 8 p.m. and other towns are not? I don't need an answer. I already asked the question. The answer is obvious. It's not effective. It can't be. It simply cannot work. And I suspect that that's one of the reasons why this provision remains in the bill. Our Secretary of State has proposed legislation as a package that she presents to the Government Administration and Elections Committee in the past, eliminating this cross-check. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit that that is part of the policy decision for this expansion of EDR. So just to follow up on Linda Grace, the very kind Registrar of Voters in Bridgeport who shared her comments with us, just to follow up on her questions and some of the stuff she said, EDR locations are going to be open from 6 in the morning to 8 p.m. And this bill essentially prohibits people to get into the line and register to vote after 8 p.m. So in other words, if you are in line, you are covered. If you are not, and that it would require a police officer or someone to get into line. So I'm concerned that there are going to be some funding issues in police departments going forward. How do we anticipate this is going to work? If, as Linda said, there's a possibility that there is a line of people that weaves through the streets of Bridgeport, who is going to make sure that that cutoff is observed, and who's going to prevent people cutting into line? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President. As the bill states, at 8 p.m., a police officer would be placed at the end of the line. It would be the duty of that officer to make sure that nobody cuts in line. Of course, these laws would be enforced not only by our local police, but by the poll workers and the poll watchers who we rely upon for the integrity of our elections. And I apologize if the good senator feels I skirted his question earlier. So long as a voter is registered in another town, there will be a cross-check. A call will be placed. If it is later determined by the registrar who either picks up the phone because they're at the office late counting ballots, as may be the case, or because they get it the next morning, there is a process of accountability where that individual can be followed up with, where their vote can be taken into account and perhaps undone. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer, but I'm driving at what happens when there is no police officer. What if that cannot happen? And how can we put that on a registrar to make sure they know who exactly is in line at 8 p.m. if that line goes down the street? I don't think we can. This is just a symptom of legislation that is not well thought out, that the people that have to deal with this are contacting us to tell us that they have grave concerns about it. I mean, what happens? How can they determine whether or not a person was legitimately in the appropriate line by 8 o'clock? I don't know that they can. And then what happens when there is a dispute over that? Who's going to mitigate that situation? Are we expecting the registrar to do it? Are we suggesting that the police should tell someone that they can or cannot vote on the same day that we're discussing qualified immunity? I don't know. What happens? Do some people just get turned away because they were not in line at a certain time? These things are going to happen. This is not some, dream I'm having. We heard right from the Bridgeport registrar that there will be hundreds of people in line at 8 o'clock. And she doesn't know how anyone's going to determine who was supposed to be where and who's eligible to vote and who is not. Moving on to Section 8. Section 8 suspends certain provisions that are in our law already. Basically, we have provisions on our law that account for what's called supervised voting. So some people who are in various types of institutions, maybe a healthcare facility, a residential care home, or assisted living, something like that. The way it happens now is the registrars basically keep an eye on that entire process to make sure that it's done legitimately and those ballots are collected, the people vote, and they are returned. And they are always monitored by both registrars so that there is a chain of events. This particular bill suspends these provisions. Section 9159Q requires that absentee ballots be jointly delivered to applicants at the institution and jointly supervised, and then that they are returned in envelopes, and then everything is cataloged properly. Section 8 suspends this provision. The same existing law requires that rejected ballots be jointly delivered or mailed in sealed envelopes to the town clerk. This provision also allows the suspension of that provision. The existing law requires registrars to appoint designees of party-endorsed candidates to be sworn to the faithful performance of his or her duties. Again, this section allows for the suspension of this provision. The same law prohibits a registrar of voters who has a spouse, child, or dependent relative residing in the registrar's household who is a candidate in an election or primary from supervising the absentee ballot voting. Section 8, again, allows for the suspension of this provision. So, through you, Madam President, why are we allowing the Secretary of State, who, as I mentioned, is the chief election officer of our state, but is also a partisan elected official, to suspend procedures that are clearly meant for the purpose of ensuring the fairness of our elections?
Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the good senator for his question. I do just want to say two brief things. One, the Secretary of State may belong to a political party, but I hope everyone feels in this building that it is her responsibility to, and I say this looking at a former Secretary of State, that it is her responsibility to ensure every person has the right to vote, regardless of who they cast their ballot for. I also want to say that this state, as I'm sure the good senator is well aware, has been devastated, specifically in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, by the COVID-19 virus. Here in my district, we know that a huge bulk of the deaths have stemmed from the virus spreading. That is why our Department of Public Health and our governor has been so vigilant about restricting access among those who do not live in the assisted living facility into those care centers. That is the intention of this legislation. We do not want to jeopardize public health through our elections. That, I would argue, Madam President, is the theme of this bill. And the portion addressed in this section is making sure that our elections do not jeopardize the very safe and secure environment that the heroes, frankly, who work in our nursing homes and assisted care facilities are working so diligently to protect. We want to make sure that individuals cannot rapidly come in and out of those facilities during the election. That is the intention of this legislation. I thank the good senator for his question.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate that response. And it's very tempting to get into a debate over the governor's management of the situation with nursing homes and COVID-19, but that is a separate issue that we'll have to tackle another day. And I am certainly sympathetic to people in those situations, and I want to make sure that we do everything we can as far as precautions to make sure that they are protected. In fact, I would suggest that that should have been our goal all along as a state, is to protect the vulnerable population from COVID-19 as our first and foremost priority before anything else. But the fact remains, the suspension of some of these rules is really shocking. These are not arbitrary laws. They exist for a reason, and permitting a partisan official who's, to be honest with you, made very, very little effort to be nonpartisan or even bipartisan on the subject of elections, and who has a history of running elections that have problems every Wednesday morning after Election Day. For the last 10 years, you can look at our elections in this state, and every Wednesday morning there is some major news story about bags of ballots found in Bridgeport, or people in line, being counted, mass swearing-in ceremonies, and a whole myriad of things. This is dangerous, and it should alarm every resident in this state that these very, very important laws are being waived for the purpose of this legislation. Sections 9 through 13, I think, or Section 14, in fact, these are more or less technical. Section 15 ratifies the governor's executive order. I would just want to point out that I believe that the reason why that was added as an amendment in the House, I believe it was done purposely to counter an argument being made in the Supreme Court. And it's a scary thing that there is clear and direct communication on this subject between the three branches of government, something that should not happen. They are supposed to be checks and balances on one another and not working together to undermine the minority's concerns over the constitutionality. And in fact, I don't believe there's ever been a precedent where the legislature has gone and passed a law to basically undermine a constitutional question that is being debated in the Supreme Court. And I'd also point out that it doesn't much matter, because the Constitution is the Constitution. And no matter what laws are passed by this body, we do not have the power to change the Constitution itself, even with the diligent efforts of amendments produced by the House. Clearly, there are issues with this bill. Though I will admit that most of my issues with some of the provisions that are contained within are not so much about the policy itself. I want to accommodate people in the ease of voting as much as any other person. And I believe that, it makes sense to me that if you're in line by 8 o'clock, you should be counted. I don't even object to that, and I'm going to support the bill as a result. My concerns are really more about this process and whether or not these provisions that are in this bill will ultimately be misused for political purposes. That is my concern, and it's a real one. There's a constant argument made by the majority that Republicans want to suppress the vote, and that our arguments about the dangers of voter fraud are made up and they're not real, and that really we're just trying to prevent certain people from voting. That's disgusting. I don't want to attribute to anybody in this room, but it is something that every Republican legislator that I know has been accused of numerous times with no evidence. And we're here, and I would suggest that this bill is likely to leave this room unanimous in an effort to allow people an expanded way of voting as a result of COVID-19. But fraud is a real thing, and an expansion of absentee ballots is a concern because fraud is rampant even without this expansion. And this legislative body needs to, in the next cycle, the next legislative session when the Government Administration and Elections Committee meets, it needs to tackle that issue to make sure that the integrity of our elections is not questioned. Our system of government and laws only exists, is only going to be trusted to make the laws if our elections are legitimate and trusted by the people. When that goes away, so does our ability to have order and have a just society. I want to point out that even Senator Looney in this room a year ago, if I can find his remarks, said the following. While discussing early voting, he mentioned that voting in the voting booth is essential protection because of the secret ballot and the privacy of the voting booth. He said the House took up this issue, and that is opening the process potentially to universalization of absentee balloting. And I think that is legitimately controversial because for sure who is casting an absentee ballot. And I agree with him. The problem with absentee ballot fraud is that it is not uncovered ever. And if it is, it's usually long after the fact and it's impossible to find out who the perpetrator is. The way absentee ballots work is that they are more or less private. There is no identifying information to really trace them back to the person that might have been involved. And I don't want to get into any examples of fraud today. We've had that debate in here before, and I'm certain that we will have it many, many more times. I want to confirm something that came up in the House. So, Madam President, I have a question for the proponent that is maybe the most important thing I've asked throughout this entire process. It was discussed in the House, and I would like to confirm once more right here that this bill, the one that's before us that we're going to be voting on, does not contain any authority for the Secretary of State, past, present, or future, including our November election, to mass mail absentee ballot applications. There is nothing in this bill that has to do with that. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Madam President, and it's good to see you up there. I thank the good senator for his question. Title IX, Section 140 is not impacted by this legislation in any way. As the good senator may be aware, this is the state statute that allows individuals to circulate absentee ballots. It allows candidates to circulate absentee ballots. It allows partisan town committees to circulate absentee ballot applications. And it is so crucial that the Secretary of State, in sending out absentee ballot applications for the August 11th primary, or if she chooses to do so for the November 3rd election, is acting within the power granted not only to her, but to many actors in the political process through Title 9, Section 140 of our state statutes.
Thank you very much, Senator Haskell. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you very much, my colleague, for making that clear that this bill does not impact that whatsoever. And whether or not she had the legitimate ability to do so is a separate matter altogether. But I think because this is a relevant bill, this is the time to address this concern. An amendment was offered in the House to discuss the same exact situation, and I believe it needs to be addressed here also. The fact is that while I am very much in favor of allowing people to vote by absentee ballot because of COVID-19, I believe we need to use the existing process, which is you contact the town clerk or you do it online, but you request your absentee ballot the same as we always did for the other reasons that are valid excuses for voting absentee. That is the only legitimate way for us to conduct an election. This mass mailing of every person who is on the voter rolls is, in short, a disaster. I have heard from countless constituents, and I have a stack of them right here of people who have contacted me, sent me copies of things showing that they have gotten something that is suspect with regard to this mass mailing. The fact is that there are tens of thousands of people on the voter rolls in our state that don't belong there. They have either moved to another state, or they've passed on, or they're on there multiple times because they have lived in different addresses, or they got married and their maiden name is still a registered voter and so is their married name, and that is all showing up right now. Just a few examples. Leslie Jane wrote me and said that simply, should I be receiving 2 of these ballots? I would say no, you shouldn't be. Teresa Corbin wrote me and said a copy of an image that her daughter sent her indicating, by the way, he is dead, referring to the person it was addressed to, which I believe was the previous resident. My friend Alexandra shared a post on social media that says that her friend Chris and his friends were curious why a person might receive 2 absentee ballots for the same individual, one with their maiden name and one with their married name, and they put photos of them online for the world to see. Jeff Weiss says there is 0 procedure in the town clerk's office to verify applications. Jason Webb wrote me and said, State Senator Rob Sampson, I received multiple absentee ballots to my address in names that I have no idea who they are, and I contacted my local election office and notified them, and all I got was, nothing we can do about it. Mike Joswick wrote me and said, my father got an application for an absentee ballot. He's been deceased for 4 years. Elizabeth wrote me. She said, we got a ballot request for someone who, according to property records, hasn't lived there in 5 years. Sherry wrote me. My mother received one for a woman who doesn't reside at her house. Susan, my grandfather has been dead for 25 years and received one. Unreal. Andrew wrote me. We received ours the other day. They sent my youngest son an application, but he hasn't lived in Connecticut for 4 years. TJ wrote me. I received mine and one for my son who moved out of state over 5 years ago. I could go on. I have pages of these. Most of them are for people that moved away from that residence, but many of them are for college-age students, I presume, who moved to another state and are voting in that state, but they're receiving an absentee ballot application at their parents' address, whatever. Deceased people. The problem is that our voting rolls are not accurate. The fix for that is to only allow people to request them when they need them. It's been the system that we have used and has been satisfactory for all of the other excuses on the absentee ballot application. Active duty in the military, absence from town, my illness, which has existed on this for years, physical disability, etc. Those have all been acceptable reasons in the past. We should not change that process now. I've also heard the Secretary of State state that so far 100,000 of these ballot applications have been returned to her. Further evidence that the list is wrong and these ballot applications are floating around out there. With that, Madam President, I will offer another amendment, which is to offer an opportunity to my colleagues to prevent this from happening again. We're going to deal with it through this primary election, right or wrong, because it's already been done. But we don't have to deal with it in November. We can use the existing law, the system that has been in place, with the simple addition of COVID-19 as a new eligible excuse that we all agree to. I want to offer an amendment, Madam President, to prevent the mass mailing of ballot applications to every person and use the existing system instead. The clerk has an amendment that is LCO 3838. I'd like it to be called and have the opportunity to summarize.
Thank you very much, Senator Sampson. Mr. Clerk, do you have that amendment?
I do, Madam President. Senate
Please
Amendment.
Please proceed.
Senate Amendment B, LCO 3838 for House Bill 6002.
Senator Sampson, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a very, very simple amendment. It adds 3 sentences to the end of the bill that says, notwithstanding the provisions of subdivision 1 of this subsection, the Secretary of State shall not mail unsolicited applications for absentee ballots to any person. This means if someone wants to vote by absentee, they go through the current and legitimate process. And this will not be a concern that will disrupt our November election. And I encourage my colleagues to please vote for this. I think we are all very much in favor of the bill about COVID-19, taking care of that. I think the people of this state want to see that happen also. This is something that I think people are concerned about legitimately.
I
move adoption.
Yes, did you move the amendment?
Yes, I move adoption, and I'd like a roll call vote. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Haskell?
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good senator's remarks. I want to encourage my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, and I would love to take an opportunity to briefly explain why. First of all, it is precisely the opposite feedback that I've been hearing from my constituents. I can't even begin to tell you how many folks have reached out to say, wow, it was so convenient to have the absentee ballot application mailed to me prior to the August 11th primary. I might have forgotten to vote about the August 11th primary, given everything that's happening in the news. So contrary to the senator's experience with his constituents, my constituents have greatly appreciated this opportunity. I also want to take a second to make a very important distinction, and that is the difference between an absentee ballot application and an absentee ballot. When an absentee ballot is falsely delivered to somebody, if somebody casts a vote pretending to be somebody else, that is a huge crime. It is a state crime and a federal crime, since we have federal candidates on the ballot, and it is punishable, once again, Madam President, by 5 years in prison per ballot and a $5,000 fine. However, we are not talking about the mass mailing of absentee ballots. What we are talking about, Madam President, is the distribution of absentee ballot applications, a form that, as the senator has said earlier, is widely available online for anyone to donate, a form that can be distributed and circulated freely according to our state statutes under Title IX by town committees that are partisan and by candidates, and many candidates from both sides of the aisle often decide to do so. Here's the key difference about what's happening here. Unlike partisan actors in this process, the Secretary of State's office has actually asked for a address return requested. That means that towns have an opportunity in this August 11th primary to make corrections. And the good senator is right. Our voting rolls are not perfect. I don't know of anyone in this building who would claim that we have perfect voting rolls, because, Madam President, they literally change every day. As people die, as people move into our community, our voting rolls are constantly changing. However, local officials in Town Hall perform an annual canvass to do their best they can to make sure that they're accurate. And Connecticut was actually spearheaded an interstate conglomerate called ERIC. It's an acronym that makes sure that our voting lists are regularly updated. If a voter moves out of state, so long as that state participates in our online database, then our voting rolls are updated. They are not perfect, but we are all constantly striving to make them better. And by mailing absentee ballot applications during this primary, we are learning a lot about the process, the Secretary of State's office, but more importantly, town officials are learning who no longer lives there, who's deceased, how can our voting rolls be improved. And that is just an added benefit to the Secretary's decision, as she is free to do under Title IX, although it is not contemplated in this bill, so long as this amendment doesn't pass, to send out absentee ballot applications to every registered Democrat and every registered Republican. With that, Madam President, I would urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment.
Thank you very much, Senator. Mr. Clerk, could you please, I'm sorry, yes, Senator Witkos.
Thank you, Madam President. Sorry about that. I just wanted to speak on the amendment
I'm
as well.
sorry, I apologize,
It's
my
okay.
fault. I'm just rushing the process.
Yeah. And I will be very brief. I stand in support of the amendment. I think Senator Sampson, the author of the amendment, brought out some very stark examples as to why we want to make sure that we have the utmost confidence in our elections, because it is one person, one vote, and we would never want to question whether the validity of a vote is accurate based on a mass mailing. And I want to thank my previous speaker, who spoke about the ability to print out an application, and different people can disperse those applications. And I wanted to show, make the point that Senator Sampson's amendment doesn't speak to or prohibit that from happening. In fact, that practice can continue. What his amendment does is speak to the mailing of, and mass mailing of blanket applications to all registered voters here in the state of Connecticut. There's a cost involved with that, Madam President, and we all know that the financial, outcome of the financial condition of our state right now warrants the fact that we need to look forward to saving money where we can. This does not prohibit anybody from voting. They can still, as the good senators that spoke prior to me said, people will disperse them. You can go to the library, you can print them off, but we can certainly save state dollars by not allowing the mass mailing of applications to anybody. If you want to vote, you'll vote. You'll figure out a way to get your application to you, and by the end of the day, when this bill becomes law, you'll have the ability to vote if you're in fear of COVID by absentee ballot. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Are there any other comments? Are there any other comments? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, if you could call for a roll call vote on the amendment.
There's an immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered on the Senate. For Senate Amendment B, LCO 3838 on House Bill 6002.
Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Please ensure all votes are appropriately cast. Mr. Clerk, could you please read the tally?
Total number voting is 36. Total voting yay is 14. Total voting nay is 22. Absent not voting is 0.
Thank you very much. The amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm disappointed that I'm 0 for 2 on amendments on this bill. And we've pretty much covered the whole bill section by section. So I think I will just kind of wrap up by reminding everyone that voting in person is crucial to our society having faith in free and fair elections. When you show up to the polls to vote, you can see that the process protects the privacy of the individual's vote, is free from voter intimidation, is orderly, it's well managed. You feel that your vote is taken seriously and that it's going to be counted. And that, maybe even most importantly, that you are participating in the great experiment of America and self-government. Now, COVID-19 has clearly thrown a wrench in everything, not the least of which is our elections. But I'm hopeful that this is only a temporary wrench and that someday we are going to get back to normal. As I said from the outset, I am going to vote in favor of this bill. And you can tell if you've listened to any part of this debate that I have strong concerns about some parts of it. But I feel like I'm essentially boxed in, and that if I want to very clearly and affirmatively support my constituents' desire to have COVID-19 as an acceptable reason to vote absentee, I've got no choice but to vote this bill forward, warts and all. And I am hopeful that the things that I brought forward as concerns throughout this debate, whether it is the expansion of Election Day registration and the long lines that will undoubtedly exist in our major cities after 8 p.m., and I feel for the many volunteers and registrars that will be involved, and I'm hopeful they can tackle the problems they're going to be faced with. I'm concerned about these post office box-looking ballot boxes, and I am very hopeful that they are not tampered with or damaged in any way. I learned just a few minutes ago, someone told me that those ballot boxes are only looked after during the weekdays. So essentially, if someone drops their ballot in on Friday, it's not going to be retrieved until Monday. I just think there's way too much risk and not enough supervision in that process. And I believe our system of elections needs to be treated with the highest standards possible, that we make every effort to let every citizen of this state know that their vote counts and that we're not playing games here. And we are not going to just say, well, it's okay if one or two of these ballot boxes were tampered with. The election's still good. In order for an election to be treated as a legitimate election, people have to believe with all their heart that all the votes counted, that the result is what was intended by the people voting, and that every person's vote matters as much as every other person's vote. And some of these provisions put that in jeopardy, and that disturbs me. But I am glad that we are going to pass this, and we are going to do it in this legislative body the right way by debating it and voting on it as the representatives of our constituents. And I encourage my colleagues that even with the warts this bill has, it is important and necessary to ensure that people can still vote even if they have concerns about COVID-19. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell.
Thank you very much.